The PPP lost the seat of government in May 2015 after 23 years in power. On August 2nd last year, they were back in office after one of the most incredible elections Guyana, the world, had ever seen. President Irfan Ali swore in members of his cabinet, but there was no finance minister. 3 months later, Dr. Ashni Singh was appointed. Why him? What are his priorities for getting the country up and running from the beating it has taken from the protracted elections period and the COVID-19 pandemic? And of course, this PPP government has the first jump at managing the resources that will flow from the vast oil fields offshore Guyana. What's Dr. Ashni Singh's take on the petroleum sector and how it will serve the development agenda of the PPP government? All those questions answered in this week's Insider. On the streets of Guyana, it seems a nation eager to get back to normal. The dreary scenes of lockdowns around the world find no match here. The government, anxious to restart the economy, has put over $10 billion in people's hands by way of COVID-19 relief grants and bonuses for public servants. The spending is easing back up. Most of the 7,000 persons who contracted the virus have recovered, on the 200 deaths reported. But the windfall expected from Guyana becoming a major petroleum player in the world just 5 years after oil was discovered offshore has been stunted by the pandemic. But there's no doubt that once it eases, life will become very different in this tiny nation of just 750,000 people. To date, there have been 18 oil discoveries made on the license of ExxonMobil and its partners. There's a lot of money that will flow from the 8 billion barrels of oil lying in the so-called Stabroek Block. And there's no telling what other discoveries could be made from the very busy prospecting operations offshore.
Without a doubt, there will be a rapid transformation. And you're seeing it already. You're going to see hotels starting being built. You're going to see new office blocks, not so much government buildings, but you're seeing the private sector, including the international private sector, coming and establishing new office presence, new port facilities, etc. So without a doubt, there's going to be a rapid physical transformation of the country. That's underway already, and the physical evidence of that is there for all to see.
Dr. Ashni Singh was working with the International Monetary Fund on a range of issues in Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia and Europe when he was called to return to Guyana to take up the post as Minister of Finance, a position he held twice before. Every single cabinet post was filled in early August, but not that of Minister of Finance. The President waited on him for 3 months, but you wouldn't get him to talk about why that was. Why was Ashni Singh absolutely needed to take on the post?
I considered myself to be greatly privileged that the President thought that I was the candidate that he wanted to appoint to the Ministry of Finance. I thought long and hard about it when I was approached, and eventually and agreed to accept the office. We could have a whole conversation about the various considerations that weighed in my mind, but I was greatly privileged that the President considered me to be, the preferred candidate to be his finance minister, and I was happy to accept the invitation to serve in his cabinet.
Managing the petroleum sector and keeping it clean, away from corrupt hands, remains one of the biggest concerns in the country.
We recognize the importance of ensuring that we do all that is necessary to stem that leakage in all of the sectors. And we've spoken of a lot of this. I mean, if you take oil and gas, for example, you know that we've already committed to adopting the major international standards on transparency in the oil and gas sector. We have said publicly that we will participate in the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which will see us complying with, these are international standards. This is the gold standard of international transparency as it relates to management of the oil and gas sector. We have already also, in terms of our domestic practices, for example, that We're firmly committed to ensuring transparency in the management of our fiscal affairs. Recall that we were the government that reintroduced audited financial statements, and we're committed to ensuring that the fiscal affairs of the government are completely transparent.
In his New Year's message, President Irfan Ali said Guyana must not remain a rich country of poor people. It is up to men like Ashni Singh to deliver on the promises to transform the country's infrastructure and improve the well-being of citizens.
I would not, I would not say to you that we believe that, it's going to be easy ensuring that all of this falls into place. And certainly not. I mean, we're entering a new period in Guyana's economic history, which will no doubt bring new challenges, including the challenges that are traditionally associated with an oil and gas industry that brings rapid prosperity into the country. But I believe that the PPPC has a well-established track record of demonstrated commitment to sound and responsible fiscal management. I think, we've demonstrated this on our previous time in office. I believe we have demonstrated this since our return. Here again, I would say to you, we're under no illusion about the magnitude of the challenge. And I wouldn't, say to you that I believe that this is going to be a walk in the park and all of these problems are suddenly going to disappear. It's not going to be. It's not by any stretch of the imagination going to be a walk in the park. There are going to be challenges. You are absolutely correct that a rapid influx of inflows, such as is associated with producing oil and gas, brings a unique set of challenges, including the challenges that you've identified. But let me say definitively, if you've listened, as I know that you have, if you've listened to the pronouncements made by President Ali and the leadership of his government, we are not unmindful of these challenges, and we're firmly committed to confronting them.
Dr. Singh has been put to manage the country's finances and navigate the path to an economic recovery and an eventual boom after one of the most difficult electoral periods in the country's history, one that shocked the world and paralyzed the country.
Can you believe this? Can you believe this?
4 days after Guyanese went to the polls on March 2nd, these were the incredible scenes at the elections headquarters when it became clear that there was a clear plan to rig the elections to keep the retired Army Brigadier David Granger and his government in power. A lot was at stake in the elections. The winner would have the first jump at managing the funds that would flow from the giant oil fields offshore Guyana. The first lift, 1 million barrels, apportioned to Guyana by the developers ExxonMobil and its partners, had already sailed. $55 million or just about 11 billion Guyanese dollars guaranteed. 4 other lifts were to follow in 2020, though at a reduced price with the onset of COVID-19. It would take 5 months before the attempts to steal the elections were overcome. While all of that was happening, the country was at a standstill.
People immediately saw hints, or more than hints, they saw clear signals that suggested a return to dictatorship. And investors react in the perfectly logical way. They don't want to do business in a dictatorship. And so they immediately adopted an ultra-cautious approach, no longer investing, no longer expanding, scaling back their operations, no longer creating jobs, in fact, reducing employment and so on. And that in turn caused hardship on people.
Dr. Singh's first mandate from the president was to get the people spending again, to get the economy going from the stalemate that was brought on by the elections period and the country jittery from COVID-19. Hence, the rollout of the COVID-19 cash grants and bonuses to public servants.
We've seen an immediate response to the various measures that we implemented. The feedback has been incredibly positive. Lots of people in the private sector have been saying that it's been, very bright Christmas. It's been that they have seen a dramatic increase in economic activity. So that's the feedback that we've been getting. And when you consider that we're still operating in a very subdued environment, given the realities of COVID-19, I mean, the reality is that, we're not back to, completely, we're certainly not in a COVID-free environment, and that obviously subdues the activity in some sectors. It's inevitable that COVID will have and is having an impact on economic activity. But notwithstanding the fact that COVID is still with us, the feedback that we've gotten and all indications are very clearly that economic activity has picked up immediately. I will say this too. One cannot underestimate the importance of confidence, investor confidence and consumer confidence. A lot of this is psychological as well. And over the course of the 5 years, you had an environment where the private sector felt that they were not sitting on the same side with government, but they were sitting on the opposite side from government. And there was a climate of fear that pervaded the entire society. And the reality is that that had a severe negative impact on investor confidence. And don't underestimate, I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact of this sort of antagonistic approach to the private sector. Also private sector being threatened and all sorts of things like that.
The 5 months election saga was not where the slowdown of the economy began.
Mr. Siperson.
Yes.
Mr. Figueroa.
In fact, it started on December 21st, 2018, when after just 3.5 years, David Granger's government was toppled in a no-confidence motion in Parliament. The Constitution dictated elections in 3 months, but from one maneuver to the next, Granger's government remained in place for another 2 years. For those 2 years, Guyana's main foreign partners put a hold on any new development assistance and deemed the government unconstitutional. Local businessmen took on a similar posture. And so the new government wants to get the private sector back into being the engine of growth.
I have said publicly, and I've said it frequently, that on President Irfan Ali's first day in office, and I have been at pains to emphasize not his second day or his third day, the first day that he started working as president, he convened a meeting with the leadership of the private sector and engaged them. And that was a reflection of his government's recognition of the importance of the role of the private sector, and was also a clear indication of our commitment to work closely with the private sector, to treat the private sector as a true and genuine partner in development. And that has been the tone that has been maintained. It doesn't require any effort to maintain it because we believe it. And so we have continued to work closely with the private, to remain closely engaged with the private sector. We will continue to remain closely engaged with the private sector. And so there's also been a dramatic turnaround in investor confidence. And so lots of projects, lots of private sector projects that have been put on hold over the last 5 years because of the environment of intimidation and threats and so on. A lot of that is being unlocked now. And a lot of those projects are now being put back on the table and are being put back on the fast track. And that in turn generates jobs, and it kind of restores confidence to the economy more broadly.
Dr. Ashni Singh has been doing some of those engagements himself. Last week he traveled to the Berbice Sugar Belt, here meeting with the Upper Quarantine Chamber of Commerce.
First of all, this meeting represents an engagement in which we better understand what the priorities of the business sector is, first of all, or what those priorities are. So it gives us a better understanding of what are the issues that affect the business community most significantly and what they would like to see addressed most urgently to alleviate some of the constraints that they face, which can only be a good thing, right? And like I said, we don't consider the private sector to be sitting on the opposite side of the table from us. We're sitting on the same side. We're on the same side. We have the same objective, which is development of the economy and improvement of the well-being of people.
In steering the country towards a development path over the coming years, the government has been keen to point out that it will not depend on the petroleum sector as the only big earner for Guyana. That's why work is underway to revive the sugar industry, long one of the country's biggest employers and a cornerstone of the agriculture sector, which has been the backbone of the country's economy. Already in just 4 months, $7 billion in subsidies have been given to the state-owned Guyana Sugar Corporation to reopen 3 of the 4 sugar estates which were closed by the previous government. Yes, it is true that sugar has not made a profit a while now. Production costs outweigh the market price, but getting the thousands fired back to work is a priority for this government. The Skeldon estate, when it was opened, was billed as the most expensive project ever to be undertaken in the country at the time, and it was said to be the factory that would save sugar. But that did not happen. It was one of the 4 estates which were closed by the former government. Dr. Singh recently met with private cane farmers who once supplied the Skeldon factory. Apart from the canes cultivated by the Sugar Corporation, the running of the factory was dependent on these private cane farmers. When the factory was closed at the end of 2017, they had to abandon their fields and they were shackled with debt to the commercial banks. For the Skeldon factory to function efficiently when it is reopened, it needs the canes from these private farmers. But with no money, they cannot go back to the lands on their own. They need the government's help in preparing the lands for cultivation. But they also need something to be done with their loans. Dr. Singh said the government was intervening to get the commercial banks to restructure the loans.
The devastation that the human tragedy that has unfolded as a result of the closure of the sugar industry should be exposed and should not be downplayed. You know, it's very easy to say you're plugging billions of dollars in. When you devastate an entire community, when people can no longer work, I can tell you, I walked through Skeldon Market. And these are real examples that I'm speaking of. I spoke with multiple stallholders. I remember a particular lady with whom I spoke with tears in her eyes, who said to me, her son, her husband had died in an accident. In fact, he had worked in sugar and he had died in an accident on the road. Her son used to work in sugar. Her son was now out of work as a result of the APNU AFC's closure of the sugar industry. He could no longer take care of his children. She now had to take care of the grandchildren. He turned to alcohol as a result of being out of work and as a result of being unable to take care of his children. There was all sorts of family problems. She was now an elderly single mother and single grandmother trying to take care of her son and his wife and her grandchildren. And there were tears in her eyes as she told me this story, literally pleading for something to be done. Not to help her personally, but for something to be done to resuscitate the economy of her village. And you know, Neil, this is not a one-off story. You go to other villages. I remember going to another village. I remember, in fact, speaking with somebody else on the quarantine as well, who said to me that they had attended 3 funerals in 1 week. And all 3 of those funerals were of former sugar workers who were out of work, had no income, couldn't provide for their children, and had committed suicide. And these are real stories. And they are replicated 1,000 times over. They're not one-offs. Go and speak to the people in the villages.
We did find out, talking to some of the hundreds who have been rehired as work continues to reopen the estates. Tell me about your work on this estate before it was closed.
Well, we work mill dock, all around the dock. We work cut cane. 15 years we cut cane, and then we come in mill dock. We work pond slip. We work cane transport, raise duck pond, and to now I'll be in fly back, and we're glad about that.
So tell me, when the estate closed, what happened to you?
And work now there no way. People now want people like I used to work.
What do you mean, people like I did?
And they say I be too old, we can't do the work and so. And out there you get serious cement work, and you know, you not get security job as you like. The place really tight up.
Was that really hard for you?
Hard, very hard. You have to pay loan. $20,000, then cut down. Now I pay 20, I used to pay 30. So I go in and I tell them and then reduce them. Me glad all be there here, we come together, put our shoulder to the wheel and bring back the estate.
It was pressure. It's because I started to sell my household things, so that's what I keep myself. Even to the fowl and duck where I have to maintain my eggs and them things, them, no? I have to get rid of them. For sell, for go buy rice and them things for eat.
It was really hard.
Hard, tough. Yes, I'm happy, very happy I employ back at the moment right now. I employ and I follow, my fellow workers will come in too. Hundreds more will come because family suffer a lot. Hundreds of workers. I see on the bread line, on the table, food in there.
But it's not just sugar. All aspects of the agricultural sector are being looked at for revitalization. This is the Mahika-Maikoni-Abari Agricultural Development Area. It covers half of the country's rice production, about a third of all livestock, mostly cattle, and about 10% of national sugar production. At the heart of the project is the biodiversity-rich Water Conservancy. A catchment area of some 312 square miles traps rainwater in the upper reaches, and it flows down to a lake measuring some 125 square miles, which then holds the water to irrigate tens of thousands of agricultural lands. But in the previous 5 years, the scheme was almost brought to its knees when the then APNU plus AFC government cancelled the subvention the MMA's Agricultural Development Authority depended on to fix the dams and drainage and irrigation canals. Farmers were stunned too when charges for using the lands skyrocketed. Farmers like Shamir Suban were at their wits' end when the program to fix roads and drains were neglected for lack of funds when the previous government stopped the subvention to the MMA ADA, saying that farmers should pay more and that money should be used for maintenance works.
Rice farming for me is very nice, but let me say in the past 5 years that APNU government went in power, we feel severe pressure due to drainage, irrigation, and perhaps a dam, especially the MMA all-weather road, which is supposed to be all-weather road that you can come in and go out anytime. Tractor, double drive tractor couldn't come in here, so for the 5 years we can't get to control the crop properly.
For Mr. Suban, the flurry of activities in the scheme now is a welcome sign.
Now for the past couple months, I guess, the PPP take office. I see all the trends clean, that is very nice. For we as rice farmers, that is the most important thing. Drainage and irrigation. If you can't get good drainage or irrigation, we can't get a good crop. On the other hand, for this crop here, we notice, we get a lot of blasts. The blasts come due to the weather. So we take blows this crop because most farmers I talk to cut like 12, 15 bags per acre. But that not mean that we're going to stop planting rice. We still got to go again.
For others like Mr. Suban, rice in the MMA is all they have known. It's a family business, as it is a tradition.
It starts from generation. My grandfather was planting rice, and my father started to plant rice. We leave school and go with my fathers to start planting rice. So I start working combine at the age of 12 years. Start work combine and tractors.
For rice to be a success, it depends on the infrastructure.
When it's rainy season, it's hard. When you not get for the past 5 years, we go back to that way again. You not get access to come to the field. Then then you got come down bad. Well, if you do reach, you got pump in water, you got pump out water. That make it hard. But time like now, when you get good drainage, good irrigation, you get good dam, it's not hard. It's a very easy work at this time.
But now, the new PPP government is executing a virtual rescue operation.
When the last whole of Spain turn back.
Dr. Singh was among those who participated in the ceremonial turning of the sod ceremony for the construction of this road into an all-weather access road, which would make life easier for farmers. It will stretch some 5 miles and cost $327 million. The construction of the road is part of a larger plan of support for the Mahika-Maikoni-Abari Development Authority to see that it realizes the original idea to put 450,000 acres of land to use. But it's not just agriculture. Other key sectors are being examined to see how they can be strengthened so that the economy does not become dependent on the petroleum sector.
And you couldn't have been more on point as it relates to our policy position. We want to ensure that as this transformation takes place, we want to ensure that everybody in Guyana benefits. And so we're trying to make sure that every Guyanese person of working age is able to get a job, to be meaningfully employed, to be able to earn an income that they can live comfortably, to be able to own a home that they can live in comfortably, to be able to educate their children in the way that they would like to, so that their children can enjoy a better life than, I mean, we all have that aspiration that our children can live a better life than we live. We all legitimately have that aspiration. There's been a lot of talk for generations about Guyana's strategic geographic location. So we've all been saying we're on the northern coast of South America, we're contiguous to northern Brazil, Roraima and Amazonas in northern Brazil. We're contiguous to Suriname. You know, you can literally get in a car and drive from Brazil, or load up a lorry and drive from northern Brazil and have access to shipping ports into the Atlantic, or drive from Suriname into Guyana and have access to shipping lines from Guyana. But the infrastructure to facilitate that, to leverage Guyana's unique and strategic geographical location, the critical supportive infrastructure has never been in place and could never have been afforded. We see this as a time when we could ensure that that infrastructure can be put in place to lay the foundation for the long-term leveraging of Guyana's peculiar and unique advantages. So we have spoken, for example, of the road from Brazil to Port Georgetown, or the Atlantic coast in Guyana. We see that as a project that has tremendous interest, not only in Guyana, but perhaps even more so in northern Brazil, where there's a high recognition. In fact, you will recall that when the bridge across the Takatu River was constructed, very clearly, the private sector in northern Brazil very clearly said that they saw a remarkable opportunity being able to access the Atlantic through Guyana. But the road in its current condition doesn't allow for that. If we open that road up, it provides it, and we combine it with the Deepwater Harbor, we combine it with the bridge across the Quarantine River, you suddenly dramatically open up the market space, the economic space and the market space in which Guyana is operating. And so that has not just Guyana's potential as a shipping hub, or as a place through which northern Brazilian companies and Surinamese companies and companies from French Guyana can access a deepwater harbor and ship their produce out. But you also immediately dramatically increase the market space in which Guyanese companies are operating. And so suddenly it becomes viable for Guyanese companies that produce goods to load up a lorry, cross the Quarantine River, and have access to the entire Surinamese market, and then go further to French Guyana. It becomes viable for Guyanese companies who are producing goods to load up their lorries and their containers, hit the road, get into northern Brazil, and access that huge and vast market. Then you add on top of that the potential to transform energy infrastructure. The cost of energy has long been the single biggest impediment to Guyana's competitiveness as a manufacturing economy. The cost of power has been prohibitive for a variety of reasons, which I'm happy to speak about. I won't speak about them unless you ask me to. But the cost of energy has historically been prohibitive, as a result of which we produce all of this fantastic agricultural produce, but we haven't been able to become a value-added processor, to get into things like agro-processing, for example. I say to people, the example that I often used to give is we produce tons and tons of plantains, but we go into the shops and we still see packaged plantain chips imported from somewhere else. We produce gallons and gallons and thousands of gallons of milk products and fruit juices, but we still go into the shops and we see imported milk products and imported fruit juices and fruit downstream processed fruit products, fruit concentrates and fruit juices and so on. And a large part of the reason why it is viable to import these items rather than produce them in Guyana has been the cost of energy. We see Guyana having an opportunity now to dramatically transform our energy infrastructure. You have heard of the Gas to Shore project, which is going to see us being able to harness that resource, dramatically reduce the cost of energy. Once the cost of energy is reduced, the impact on Guyana's potential as a manufacturing destination and the cost of manufacturing in Guyana the environment for doing manufacturing business will dramatically improve. That in turn will mean spillover benefits, not just for the manufacturing companies, but an automatic domestic market for agricultural produce, the people who have the cattle farms and can produce the milk, the people who grow the fruits and vegetables, but can now sell their fruit and vegetables to people who will do downstream processing and bottling and canning and so on. The potential for all of those industries will increase dramatically. And so we have a clear strategy for investing in critical infrastructure that will ensure not just the viability, but the viability and prosperity of all of these other sectors, agriculture, manufacturing, logistics, etc., that will finally be able to realize this long heralded potential that Guyana has had in so many respects. And then when all of this come together, our profile as a country is raised, you have greater economic activity, the tourism, Guyana's visibility as a tourism destination will be elevated. So I mean, it really is, to be frank, Neil, it really is, with the right policy, and we have outlined a comprehensive policy vision, notwithstanding the dismal state that we have inherited the economy in as a government, notwithstanding the challenges that we face, it really is also an incredibly exciting time for Guyana with the right policies.
For there to be success, Dr. Singh sees the need also for a radical transformation in the attitude of the country's workers, particularly those involved in the services sector.
The physical transformation, there's going to be a remarkable physical transformation of the country. There's going to be a remarkable economic transformation of the country. There are going to be tens of thousands of jobs, and lots of people are going to be in work, and they'll be earning incomes, and we expect that they'll be living significantly better quality, enjoying significantly better quality of life. A part of that transformation we've been at pains to emphasize must be in the quality of services that are delivered, both by the public sector and the private sector. And there are a lot of things that we're doing here. I mean, to give you an example, on the public sector side, we've been speaking about harnessing information and communications technology to modernize government services, moving towards e-government, things like introducing a single window for trade transactions, a single window for housing transactions. But also on the private sector side, we've said, for example, that service quality in the tourism and hospitality sector has to be raised. We've said we will be investing in a hospitality institute to train people, to bring them up to world class. So visitors to Guyana and Guyanese people will truly have a world-class experience when they interact both with the public sector and with the private sector in Guyana.
Dr. Singh and his team are currently preparing the 2021 national budget, which would be presented next month. In this one and budgets ahead, crafting a plan for a truly diversified economy is the goal, so that with oil and gas and the other strong sectors, Guyana could perhaps achieve the potential that has always been talked about. And if it happens, Dr. Singh would have played a major role.
I expect that I will.